Hi, and welcome to CryptoBiography. I'm your host, Brandon Starr, and this is episode 125, and it's going to be entitled Soon. If you have any comments or questions about this episode or previous episodes, cryptobiography@gmail.com, or hit us up on Facebook or Twitter. And here we go. Wouldn't expect this here, Detective Vic said. Yeah, I said. We were looking from outside a room in at a body on the second floor of his house. We'd taken our time. Several people in the neighborhood had called in to report gunshots late the previous evening. The reports centered near this man's house. A patrol car had been sent out, but no one had been found who could have been involved, and no damage was found. But there was damage. It was spotted late the next morning by a neighbor walking their dog, a strange hole in this man's house, high up on the second floor. The windows had been spared, which explains why the patrolman didn't spot the damage. They would likely have noticed it if a window had been broken. The EMTs have done their usual damage to the scene in making sure the man was in fact dead. He lived alone, so there was no one to call to see if he was all right, or even in fact home at all. Calls to his phone went unanswered. Eventually, they had broken the front door down, checked the house, and discovered the body in his office on the second floor. They'd confirmed he was dead, then left the scene. While they don't go out of their way to make our job harder, it is inevitable that some evidence will be damaged in their efforts to save the person. In this case, for one example, it was difficult to determine if the front door's lock had been picked or otherwise compromised before it had been bashed in. I hoped that we could conclusively determine what had happened, if anything, but it would be an uphill battle. We were able to determine from the paramedics who popped the door that it did not seem to be unlocked, open, or obviously damaged when they entered. We had techs looking for prints throughout the house. There was nothing obviously stolen, but we would be asking relatives and friends who might know if anything were missing. Vix and I were focusing on the office. We had the green light and a little time before the body would be removed. It was clear what the autopsy would say. The man was shot to death. He had fallen sideways out of his chair and landed near where he must have been before the attack, sitting at his computer. His body was mostly curled up. I suspected that he hadn't really been able to do anything, put up any resistance, or been given any warning. The multiple bullet holes in his chest would have more or less instantly dropped him. Then he had toppled, slumped, or spasmed over the side of his chair, which was on its side near him. I suspected slumped, with his weight pulling the chair over with him as he fell. "What's this man's name?" I asked. "Ralph Reese," Vix replied. "We'll need to know if Mr. Reese had any known enemies," I said. Vix nodded. He was looking over the body and patting down the pockets. Mr. Reese had been dressed casually, not too surprising, given that he was in his own home, with sweatpants and a t-shirt. "No wallet," Vix said. "We'll need to see if it was taken, if he just wasn't carrying it." Some, though not all, of the bullets had pierced through Mr. Reese's body. 2 at least had struck the back of his chair, I could see. Checking the back of the chair, it seemed the bullets had penetrated it as well. Since Mr. Reese's desk faced the wall opposite the door, and he seems to have been at his computer, is looking more and more likely that Mr. Reese was shot from the front while at his desk, which is butted up against a wall on the second floor. I looked at his desk, which was a modern type open style with no drawers. It seemed undamaged. But behind it on the wall were several small bullet holes. They all had bits of paper peeling from the edges where the drywall had been pierced. Mr. Reese had been shot from outside his house. "Vix," I said. "Looks like I have some bullet holes showing where he was shot from." "Okay," he said. He was getting information from the body. I continued to check the room. There was little to find until I looked at the far wall. There were more bullet holes. This didn't shock me. Drywall provides almost no protection from penetration by bullets. So these bullets had gone through whatever the outside was composed of, the drywall, Mr. Reese, the back of his chair, then the interior wall's drywall. We would check and see where they went from there. But for now, I looked at the bullet holes, which were only a few inches apart. Then I looked at the bullet holes on the exterior wall. They were both at the same height, showing little or no elevation change. And Mr. Reese's body would have been in the path between him when he was sitting up. So, he was shot from the street outside, or perhaps from the lawn, but on the second floor, and not in an up at angle, but straight on, flat. The hell, I thought. Was the shooter firing from a neighboring house, a tree, a ladder, roof of a pickup truck? We were there most of the night, not getting a whole lot more done. I took a short sleep and returned to the scene. We were lucky on this case, if you could call it that, for a couple of reasons. First, Reese had lived alone. There was no pressure for us to open up the scene to relatives who might need to live there. Second, Mr. Reese's neighborhood was a quiet, suburban-type place, not typical for overkill-style murders. I was already being texted by the chief. We'd not be given another case for a while. They wanted this one solved. First thing I did was check for any unusual marks on the ground under the window and on the grass. I didn't find any. The lawn was being watered automatically, and there'd also been rain only the day before the shooting, so the ground was soft, but I found no unusual marks to indicate, say, a ladder being raised outside his house. Not that I was expecting that. It wasn't my top theory, but I had to check before I did anything else near the wall or the lawn. I took a number of long fiberglass rods and put a ladder against the wall underneath the bullet holes. Well, really hole, as the bullets had put a rather large, almost singular hole in the wall from this side. Still, given the height, I could see how no neighbors nor the patrol had noticed it at night. Vix was inside, and we spoke to each other over our phones. He also had some rods. We'd push them in from the inside or from the outside in, depending on what seemed to be likely to give us the most accurate results. I suspected he would have an easier time of it, except for having to deal with the desk, which we had moved so he could be near the wall. "I'm checking the holes. I can't see any daylight through any of them," he said. "The insulation probably filled back in after the bullets passed through." "It's all one big hole on this side anyway," I said. "It'll be more about figuring out what the final angle is instead of matching up holes." Soon he was pushing one rod, then another out the wall. He was careful to try to push them out straight. As much as you could tell from the interior wall's hole, the pattern was interesting. They nearly paralleled, which told me wherever they were coming from, they weren't moving. Not that I really expected a drive-by from perhaps the roof of an RV, but it crossed it off the list. The lines also pointed in a direction that made it clear to me that no neighbor was shooting from a window or roof. There happened to be a gap between two houses in that direction. Also, I'd have to do some calculations, but it seemed like the lines were slowly converging on a spot somewhere on or really above the lawn. Now, who could have done that, I wondered. I heard something behind me. I turned around on the ladder to see a young man holding a phone up in the air. Not like he was videoing me like some looky-loo, but like he was wanting to bring my attention to his phone. I climbed down and walked over to him. "May I help you, Mr.?" I asked. "John Davies. I live across the street. I caught audio of the shooting." I got a copy of the audio, and we went to work that night. The first part was John talking about some sort of plans he had for his music. Apparently he was trying to be a DJ or something. Then there was a buzzing noise. John stopped talking, probably because of the odd noise. This was fortunate because it allowed us to have a better quality for the sound. There was one incidental noise, which was a sliding sound as John opened his window. The buzzing became a lot louder. Then the gunshots, all together, fast, almost automatic speed. Then the buzzing quickly faded to nothing. John's window didn't face Mr. Reese's, so he saw nothing. I looked at Detective Vix. "You know what? I think we have a drone strike. A drone strike right here in our little corner of suburbia." "I think you're right," said Vix. "I'm no expert in drones, but that doesn't sound like some rinky-dink Walmart drone with a handgun taped to it. That sounded robust." Vix nodded. "Either this guy is really unlucky and had some military test that went badly wrong, or he had an enemy." And that's the end of the story. So if you have any comments or questions about this episode or previous episodes, CryptoBiography@gmail.com, or hit us up on Facebook or Twitter. And thanks for listening. Words and music, copyright 2019, CryptoBiography LLC, all rights reserved. Characters and events are fictional, fictionalized, or satirical.